Hi, I'm Judy Gula with Artistic Artifacts. We're located in Alexandria, Virginia. We do have a storefront that's open by appointment only, as the COVID strategy of retail is there now. And we do have a website, so we're available to you 24/7, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So we got lots of ways for you to join us in your creative endeavors. Today we're going to talk a little bit about beading on quilts. Most of my quilts are small. They do hang on the wall. I'm not brave enough to do a beaded quilt that you'll end up washing. If somebody's done that, let me know how it went for you. So most of mine are wall art quilts. Now, the other thing we have to get straight before we start is, what is a bead? My definition of a bead is something that I can attach. Usually I prefer to have a hole already in the item. Sometimes I drill it myself, but a bead is an item we sew onto a quilt, and a bead can be anything with a hole. So sky's the limit here. We got a lot of options. But we'll start at the beginning, and we'll start at the basics of where you start. So I just got back from a trip, and I have my little beading container that I travel with, and it's taken me a lot of time to get it down to fit in this little shoebox, but not too bad. And I do try to plan my projects out, so I limit what beads I'm bringing, but that's always the hard part. So I like these bead boxes. I was able to get these, but I wanted to show you that we do have bead mixes that we sell here, and I make them. They are an assortment of some really fabulous beads. They have leaves. Let me just open it. The top is a screw-on. It's not a pop-on. And you can... So we have leaves, we have rounds, we have bugles, squares. I work with different shapes together in one piece. I'm one of those people who take all of the greens in different sizes and I mix them together. And as you can see, this is a result of what I do when I stack and create my beading. That's why I like the colors and the shapes and the sizes all mixed together. It's the way that I work. So I usually carry some colors with me, blacks and blues, golds and oranges. And so we have these standard that you can buy online from us. And I carry that with me all the time. And then if I have some smaller specialty type beads, I just have this little case. So we have some smaller pieces, these black with the white, and maybe we got some milliflores, but those are smaller amounts, and it fits into the box. And yes, of course, you always have some room for some stash. A lot of this is a container that's most likely to be found in a bead store. We are expanding our bead category over the next several months, so stay tuned and watch what we come up with. There will definitely be more beads. I can't wait. I also take apart jewelry. So this one, these beads came from a necklace. So I cut it. I'm really like glass beads, clay beads. I'm not too much into plastic, but these was a necklace, so I'm always looking at jewelry, not necessarily to wear it, but how I can take it apart. The next thing I have is I have a box full of thread. Really, really important. Don't sew beads onto your quilt with quilting thread, sewing thread of any kind. You need to use Nymo or silamide. Now I like silamide because it's already pre-waxed, and we have been able to purchase it on a regular basis on a spool so that you get quite a lot. And then Nymo normally is from a bead store, and you can get it on these small little, they look like bobbins. And then I would recommend using a little bit of wax with this. This heavenly wax is one of the most common things that you have, or you can also have beeswax. I kind of try not to put a lot of additives on my thread. That's just one of those things that I always was told was not the most favorable thing to do. But for some of it, you need it for the strength with beading. And some beads are sharp, and they will cut your thread. So you want to make sure that you use the strongest thread you can. A lot of times I'll sew double with two threads, usually about 18 inches long, so I reduce the number of tangles I get into. But you want to be very, very strong. Now let's see. I have beading needles. I'm going to put this out so you can see it. I used to buy John James needles. And what I found, they sell you a pack of 25, but by the time you use them once, this is what they look like. See how bent they are? It must be the way I hold the needle and will operate with the needle, but all of these bent ones are, say, John James. And then after a while, it'll snap in my hand and get stuck in my finger. So I looked really hard to try and find an alternative to having it stuck in my finger. And we've come up with tulip beading needles. This is my go-to needle. Don't buy any other kind. They are a little more expensive than, say, a pack of John James, but they are not going to bend and they're not going to break. So we have shorts and we have longs. They have sizes, which, let's see, I think 10, 11 is normal, my size that I use the most. But they are superior to any beading needle I have found. So that is a highly recommended. And I think if you're using tools, it's like if you're sewing or stitching with embroidery. If you have the wrong needle, you're going to be a little more frustrated when you go to work on the project. And there's the right tool for things, and I think that it's worth it to get the right tool. So we have silamide, Nymo, tulip needles, and beads, found beads. Packaged beads, bead mixes. All right, so that's my little travel pack. So let me put it in here. And I have a few. I use this neutral color the most of the time, whether it's a dark bead or a light bead, it kind of blends in. But there are definitely colors that are available. Let me see if I can fit. Oh, and very, very sharp scissors, which we love Kay Buckley's scissors. She has the green handles, which are a little bit smaller, and then these orange ones. But really, the important part is that they're sharp because you're cutting your thread and threading your needle. So that's everything that's in my kit. Oops, I got a thread. Where did the thread go? Okay. Now, let me show you what doesn't make it into the kit. So this is my extra beads. I'm working on an African quilt at the moment, so I have a lot of African beads in there and some samples. But so I don't fit it all in the little box, but I try to keep my basics in there. Two things happen when I do beading. I plan ahead that I know I'm going to bead something, and when I do that, I am going to put Misty Fuse on my batting. And you can barely see this, but this is going to go up against my print. So with you use Misty Fuse, we have some information about that online. It's a very clear fusible. You need a parchment paper, and you need parchment paper or Teflon sheet to use it. It really needles nicely. It's feather weight, and it keeps the batting from bearding and pulling up through. And I do this when I use hand stitching as well as beading. So if I know I'm going to put beads on it, I do it that way, and I make sure I only use Misty Fuse, because if you use something else, it's going to be really hard to pull the needle through. And I'm finding that this quilt, that the African quilt that I'm working on now, that it's used something else besides Misty Fuse, and it's a little tough. It's a little hard to needle through that. Sometimes I have to use a bigger needle and switch some things out. But Misty Fuse is great. Sometimes I quilt after I have completed my quilt, which is what's happening with this African one. So I didn't plan ahead, but I decided it needed some dimension. And I can actually do the stitching without going through the back totally and not being as messy. Excuse me. So even if you've completed your quilt and you're like, oh, it needs something, don't be afraid of putting some other three-dimensional things on it. I think it's really important to do that. So the other thing I want to show you before we get into actually how to stitch is several resources that we have. So this is our colorful batik panel quilts that I wrote, and it does include some information about beading and hand stitching, because our batik panels are fabulous, absolutely great for adding beads to. We have kits that are available with beads with Harry Agoon's orange flowers. Those come with everything that you need, a needle, silicone, beads to be able to bead it, pattern, everything ready to go for you. So that's one book. This is First Time Beading on Fabric. This is Liz Kettle wrote this book, and it's wonderful. It gives you some very basic instructions that get you started. The pictures have hands on them, and you maneuver them, and it's not drawings. That was a big deal when this book came out. It was the first time. Talks about fringe, stitching, beading, sizes, all of that is in there. This came out before First Time Beading, Fabric Embellishing. Again, if you're interested in starting to do some mixed media, this is a great book to start with. We love it. It talks about beading and a lot of other embellishments. Christine Brown is one of our favorite authors, and you might know her more for her embroidery books than you do her beading books. But both of these are wonderful to have into your library. Highly recommend them. We also have embroidery stitching and Know Your Needles. And again, one of the things that was very monumental for me when I looked at Christine Brown's book for embroidery and beading with embroidery, this one, is she's really taking the embroidery stitches and putting beads on them. Rather, it's a little bit different than the way I work it. It's really hard for me to explain, but this gave me a really different way of thinking about beads. So highly recommend that. And then Knowing Your Needles, everybody should have this for everything. It talks about machine needles, hand needles, beading needles. It talks about the size of the hole, the length. The beading needles are straight all the way through, rather than another needle that might have a little bit of a flat top to it, like a crewel needle. So it's really, everybody should have this. It's really definitely worthwhile to have. And then this one, Creative Stitching for Contemporary Embroidery. This is another one that if you think about your threads and your beads, that it all really works together. So whatever you can do with the thread, you can also do with the beads and the stitching. So as I said, that was my 2020 aha moment, was like, oh my gosh, I can do that. Didn't really think about it. So put that over here. So as I said, anything can be a bead. Buttons are beads. I sew them on with silicone or Nymo. These are beads. So they're definitely, any of these kind of charms, they all count in that they have a hole and I can get them on. This guy, so what we did was he was a button, but then if you look at this one down here, he's sewn just across from his tail. So that's what I would do with this one. You just sew it across the tail, and that's okay. That counts. Lots and lots of bead fringe here. So it gives you some ideas for your fringe. It's all kinds of different kinds of beads with a leaf at the bottom. Favorite kind, this is Rosalie's, and she does some really great edging and things too. Pearls, vintage pearls. These are just very old pearl necklaces that work really well. I use those as accents. It helps me sew my linens down without fusing them and being really obvious about it. This is an eyeglass. It's got a hole in it. See? It works. And then I did some little fringe here with some vintage leaves. And these are kind of glass, I guess. But you could do them with fabric leaves if you wanted to do your piece there. And it needs a few beads up here to hold our little lace up there. These are some pearls as well. This is a hand-dyed piece, and it has the pearls. I stitch the pearls in. Again, I use them to hold things down because maybe I don't want it to be totally flat. Maybe I want some 3-dimension to it. So I'll use them to stitch in some places. These are vintage pearls on wires, and I actually just acquired some. So they'll be on the website in the next couple of months. And I love these lacquer pins. Again, that's a bead. It holds in place. These are buttons. So they're shank buttons. They're bead as well. And they sew on and give you some movement and some texture as well. This is fabric paper. I have another pin. So my definition of beads is pretty big. So how do you bead? Let me just show you a couple of things that I think are helpful. I do need glasses for this. I have a little sample that I started. So let's see. And I did try, I had this before I traveled. I had a couple of needles going, so I tend to like the short ones. This is a short piece of thread. So I have the silamide. It's helpful if it's doubled. There. And I just do a rolling knot. I know that there's another knot that's much nicer and cleaner, but anyway. So this is a piece of fabric that I wood block printed. And we have a line, we have a stack, we have a fringe, we have another line over here. So to do a line, we're going to come up here. And I'm just going to pull 3 different, that's not different, come on. So I have these 3 here. It's hard to do with my hand in the way. So I have those 3. You can see how I'm moving my needle. I pull it so that I'm up against my knot. And I'm going to come up here through my number 3 and my number 2. So here's my thread, and I'm going to come through here, and I'm going to add 3 more. And here we go again. I'm tightening it up. I usually kind of try to tighten it up so I don't bubble. Come down here, come through here. I find if I don't do a back stitch, my beads are not straight. I kind of want them kind of semi, to have that feeling of being straight. very straight on things most of the time, but I find when you do the back stitch it helps. All right, so if I want to stop, I'm going to come all the way down here, and I do knot my work. So, and you do it not intermittently through your stitching. Because the advantage to that is if somehow something gets cut or your bead gets cut, some accident occurs, if you've knotted every once in a while, then you don't lose everything. You only lose part of it. So that's really good too. Now, if I have my thread is long enough and I want to go to another space in my stitching, let's see, we were working on this one. So if I want to go over here, I actually try not to cut my thread a whole lot. If it's long enough, I go down and I go through the back and hide it. And then I'm going to come up here and let me see if I can find a bugle. So these are bugles, and they are glass rods that are cut. These are notoriously sharp. They come in different finishes, different lengths, all of that. So whenever you're working with a bugle, you want to make sure you have a small bead up against your cut piece. So treat it like crystal glass. So that's really important. So I do that. And sometimes I just do my wagon wheel that way, but again, if I want to add another piece, I'm going to come back up through here. I'm going to go through this end. I'm going to add another bugle piece here. So I did that kind of back stitch again, and then if I'm at the end of a row with this type of bugle and bead, I'm going to come up here and see I'm going to go through that last bead, and I'm going to hold it in place. So all of that helps keep the bead under control and close. So let's see, we're almost in the middle. So we'll go here. Now, didn't go as far over as I wanted because I'm gonna stacking. I love stacking. So there's these beads that have a hole in the middle. I love these beads. So I'm going to come there. I do that. This, maybe. So I have one on the end here. You can see round, this one, this one. I'm going to skip going back through this one. This is going to lock everything in place, this brassy one. And I'm going to come down here. And you can see I'm going through the beads. Can you see how that locks there? So that's locking all the rest of the beads in place. Now, this piece over here was all done that way. So you can see there's a stack here, there's a single here, there's a different shape here, but all of these are stacks. And it doesn't matter, it's all the same. This has got one here, the leaf is on its own, but most of this was stacked. So what happened when I was doing this piece, and I did pre-plan it, so this whole piece here came off, And this was what I was stitching to, and then I adhered it to the other mini quilt. So it does have Misty Fuse on it, but I did all these single stitches with the beads in here, and I didn't like the way that it looked. So then I went back, I said I needed more beads, and I added more stacking. I came away from the quilt more than these single beads. So that's how it started out. So you can make adjustments as you go very easily. You can see how you feel about what it looks like, and you can always add more. So we don't necessarily want to unstitch or unbead, leave the beads in. Go ahead and add some more. So let me just show you, let's see, that's a little short. So I'm going to knock this out. We sell needle threaders, but haven't quite had to go that route yet, so I can still thread, but some of those beading needles get pretty small. This is a little long. Now, when I do fringe, I do not double it, and you'll see why in a minute. So I do my knee there. This is definitely, this is a do not do what you see happening here. All right, I'm going to come up. Make sure my knot is good. You can always just add another knot. All right. Oh, there they are. So I'm going to do fringe. Fringe here, here, here. Would this. So I have my beads. Oops, let me turn this around so it's a little bit better. And I'm going to have a leaf at the end. So this, see, you can see the leaf goes this way. Sometimes the holes go top to bottom. Sometimes they go side to side. I just use what I have. Now, because I'm using fringe, I'm going to come back up through these with another set of thread. So now I've actually doubled my thread. These beads are large enough that you could go in there and double the thread. And if you can, some of the beads are really, really small that some people work with, and you couldn't get a doubled thread through there twice. So you want to make sure you hang. So this is, I love these kind of dangles because it extends your fringe without having to add some more beads. So what these are fabric beads, and I took them and created the fringe, but they actually all start up here. So I have them connected to this blue topper, and they're glued, they're very sturdy, and all of these fringes, I just love the idea. You can see some absolutely beautiful work where all the beads are the same and very precise. We have creative minds and a blog post about different beaded projects, and then me, I'm just all mixed up. So that just tends to be the way I operate. And all of that works well. So fringes can be a great extension to your piece. This one was what I wanted. Okay, so we talked about the buttons, so you know the buttons can be beads. Well, I just went to the beach. I was very, very lucky. So I'm always looking for shells. I'm a shellaholic. And I'm going to do a fringe. Sorry, let me come down here. So I can make a fringe with this one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some beads. to it. Add them to the back. And maybe I can come through this last bead. Let's see if this worked the way I wanted it to be. So I have my limpet shell that is attached with beads. So I've created a fringe, but I've used a found object in there. So this is the other thing that's really cool, is if you use buttons. So I have my button here, and I can add my beads. Rather than have it be the thread, so I think that that's really fun. It maybe could have used a third bead in there, but you never know until you try it. Sometimes things will bubble, and so you have to test them, especially when you're using many, many different types of beads. So beading is absolutely awesome. Okay, one more thing, and then I knew I had my list. Remember I said we could use a little bit of glue. So this is an old button, and it doesn't have a shank on it. Maybe it was an earring. So if I want to use this in my work, I'll glue this to a piece of ultra suede, and then I can stitch around it, either bead it or stitch and attach it to a quilt. So that's my really great tip for that one. And that'll work out really well. And then I think that's it. So I showed you some straight stitch, some fringe, found objects, beading with objects, stacking, which is my absolute total complete favorite, and a little bit about the differences in the beads and mixing them. I like glass. I've seen some great things with, we have some vintage plastic that we're going to have on our site. So check out our bead selection and add some beads and some 3 dimensions to your art quilts. So join us, leave us some comments, questions, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us. This is Judy at Artistic Artifacts.